Tara, thank you for joining us. Annie and I are hosting today from the Mentor's Desk. And I'll just remind you for our listeners, our main audience, the reason we're putting this content together is to help early career or novice researchers who are trying to start out their research career, getting their first major grant and trying to build an externally funded research career. So that's who we're trying to help. And our goal is to help them, develop the careers they envision for themselves, avoid some pitfalls, and do best practices when they're writing grants or making collaborations or other things.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. So we want to start just by getting to know you. Annie and I know you here at the University of Colorado in the Combat Research Center. So we thought we'd ask you to tell us a little bit about your main training, which I know you have some clinical training. Tell us about your field and why you studied that field.
Okay, so I work primarily in a research lab. I've worked in research labs since my undergraduate degree, which was a bachelor's in biology. I initially thought I wanted to go to veterinary school, worked in a veterinary clinic, said this is not for me. But the research lab I worked in had these wonderful scientists. One was an expert in the field of coagulation, and the other one was an MD researcher who focused on coagulation abnormalities that occur secondary to chemotherapy. And so working in their lab, we got to develop new antibodies and do these wonderful experiments, and ultimately developed a test for diagnosing heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, which happens with chemotherapy. And I just loved it, loved every second of it, and was like, okay, research is the career for me.
But now, didn't you get some clinical training along the way?
So I worked in research, and the PI I worked for was actually here in Colorado. We had wonderful success with grant funding. And then I was pregnant with my first daughter, and he was like, we're not going to get refunded. And I was like, oh, shoot. I need a solid plan B. And I'd always thought about going into nursing school. I knew MD wasn't the path for me. And so I was like, well, maybe this is a good time to apply for nursing school. So I had 3 weeks to get my application in, applied, and was fortunate enough to get in here at CU and went to nursing school here. And then managed to get a rotation working at the VA hospital, did some pediatrics, and just found pulmonary medicine was kind of where my heart was. Worked here at the University Hospital on pulmonary unit and took care of patients there.
Okay, so can I just quiz you? Why did you think, I always might go to nursing school? Where did that come from?
Right. So working with the MD researchers that I worked with, they always would come to the lab with these anomalies of, I saw the most interesting case today, and you don't see this every day, and it's unusual. And I was like, wow, I would really like to see, because what you study in research tends to be unusual. It's not the normal thing. And so I was like, they're actually seeing the people who are experiencing these abnormalities that we're trying to figure out how to treat in research. And so that was why I thought, well, clinical medicine would be something that I would be interested in doing, because then you actually get to see these patients and interact with them and see how their lives are being impacted.
Okay, let me ask you another question. It sounded like some of the experiments that you were captivated by had to do with, you said chemotherapy, which I suppose means cancer. And yet, when you were in nursing school, you were attracted to pulmonary. Is that pulmonary cancer, or was it not cancer and just lung?
Yeah, it's everything. So we would have patients who had to have tumors removed from their lungs secondary to cancer, had to go through chemotherapy. We had patients who had pulmonary hypertension, pulmonary fibrosis, and all kinds of different pulmonary ailments. And as my research career progressed from the first lab I worked in, I ended up at National Jewish doing some pulmonary work. So it kind of was a natural.
I gotcha. Okay, but then you finished nursing school. Sounds like you are a researcher at heart. How did you become a funded researcher again, having finished your nursing training?
Right. So worked taking care of patients, loved that. Vic came to our campus and I started to work with him. A lot of the work I had done prior to working with him was kind of because of September 11th, there was a lot of biodefense work that I worked in for research just because you kind of adapt your research based on where the funding is. He came to campus and he was a military researcher. And I was like, I'm not leaving nursing. I'll work with you part-time, but I'm not leaving nursing. And then as I started to work with him more and more, making that connection between research, DoD funding, the successes we were having, kind of made me pivot from being primarily inpatient nursing. I was like 100% inpatient nursing, 20% research, and then it just shifted to 60% research, 40% nursing, and then eventually it became 100% research, focusing on military research, and then I eventually left bedside nursing.
So your interest in military medical research really came from a collaborator, right? It wasn't like you woke up one day and said, I've always wanted to, worry about chemical threats or whatever.
Right. So after September 11th, the lab that I worked in focused on biological threat agents. I think primarily our research stemmed from the anthrax mailings.
Okay.
And so there was the threat of that. The researcher that I worked for in that lab, he focused on cancer research. So he was a clinician focusing on cancer research, but there was a huge need for biodefense work. So he shifted gears, went into biodefense work. We were very well funded and helped develop vaccines for some of these threat agents. And I just followed that path, although it was mostly for civilian, not military.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so then when I met Vic, I was like, well, this is kind of where everything was going. My dad was a Vietnam veteran.
Okay.
I did a rotation at the VA hospital, loved the patient population. And so I've always had a love for military servicemen and women, and just it seemed like the right fit at the right time.
So your research portfolio, if I may summarize, included some biological threat. And in doing military research now, are the ideas that you're developing vaccines for servicemen and women out in harm's way, or is it for everybody back home who might need some kind of inoculation against some kind of bioterrorism?
So I would say it's a combination. So yes, we're looking for pragmatic, field-ready therapies that can be used by our servicemen and women in the field to help prevent and protect and then rescue and save. But it also crosses over to civilian medicine because these are also therapies that can be used in an ambulance. If you're thinking like there's so many, school shootings and things like that. And so some of our traumatic injury work we do can also be used to help treat those victims in the field because oftentimes with these injuries or exposures you may experience, they don't have everything they need right there at the time. So we need something that they can, pull out of a small bag that they carry with them. They can put it in an ambulance. You can have it in those boxes in the schools, things like that.
It's interesting that this is fascinating. We were talking about the CU, Center for Combat Research, has a mission that is to save and improve lives on the battlefield and at home. And so we're always curious and asking our guests, how does your research pertain to military use and possibly pertain to back home? And you just gave us a great example of that.
Yeah, it always does. I mean, if you look at historically, some of the great discoveries in human medicine came from the military. And so unfortunately, it's a patient population that experiences some of these traumas that you just don't see every day, but you see them every once in a while in civilian medicine.
So it is so interesting to hear about the research you've done over time and what you're working on now. So what we're asking everybody is, what are you most excited about right now in your program of research?
So we have started doing, so we focus now a lot on chemical threat agents as well as traumatic injury. And oftentimes when you have a chemical exposure, whether it's military or even an occupational exposure, it comes with like a traumatic event. So an explosion or a train derails or something like that. And so we have started to do some work looking at the similarities and differences in individual chemical agent exposure, traumatic injury, and then when you combine trauma plus chemical exposure. And a lot of what we're discovering is that there are many similarities. There's little differences between when you get the two combined that might change practice, in that being able to identify, even using physiological outcomes, will help you better treat the patient that's being exposed. Because with certain chemical agents, you may not have the time to wait to treat the chemical agent. That's going to affect your patient more than the trauma is. In other cases, you can wait to deal with the chemical exposure. You can focus on the trauma.
Oh, I see. It's sort of preparing the pre-hospital people to know what is the consequential sequence.
One case, you might have to treat the chemical exposure. If you don't do that, you may lose your patient. The trauma's not going to take them out. It's that chemical agent that's going to do it. So it's kind of, these are things we suspected to see some differences, but what we're seeing is very, very different than we predicted.
And there must be an interaction, right? Because all the trauma researchers I know are completely obsessed with shock, right? It's all about shock. And, it sets the inflammatory cascades happening, and it must do lots of things to the processing of a chemical in your body as well.
Right.
So do you have to unpack all that?
I mean, to a certain level, I think that yes, you have to unpack all of that. In some cases, you got to do this first. And so we don't know enough about it right now to say, in this case, this is what you do. In this case, that's what you do. So
but that's the goal.
We're teasing that out right now. And so that, I think, is exciting. It's also exciting to talk, because you see the shock, the, endothelial cell dysfunction, vascular permeability, all of these things you see with both chemical agent trauma. And of course, you see them when you have both. So it's exciting work. It's kind of new work. There's not a ton of labs that are working on it right now. So
it sounds like that's a novel question. So it's a new question, a gap that has to be filled. I'm wondering if you, because I know your group has been pioneering a lot of the methods of how you study this. I'm curious if any of your approach is also innovative in trying to get at this.
I think one of the things we bring to the table that some other researchers don't is that clinical application. So we work with a lot of industry partners developing auto injectors or other, and they don't think about the end user, whether it's the person administering the medication or the person who's receiving it. So we know there's a million different body types out there. It's not going to be a one size fits all for everybody. And so I think I know what it's like to try and treat a patient. Vic knows as well. So we have a lot of MD fellows that come through our lab. They're taking what they're learning. They're bringing what they learned from their clinical practice into our research lab. And so I think that end user focus is something that we do that's a little more innovative.
And to piggyback on that, just because I know that you do this, can you talk a little bit about how you're researching questions where the models aren't there? So you're having to develop your own models, and talk a little bit more about how you decide when you need to do a new model or when something that exists is okay to use.
And what is a model?
Oh, thank you.
Because I had to learn that as a non-basic scientist. What is a model of a system?
Yeah, so our research models focus on clinically relevant models. So everything we develop and establish is based off of the goal is to find clinical physiological outcomes that match what we would see in a human who has the same exposure or injury. So our models, to answer the question on when do we establish a new model, it's going through the literature and trying to find somebody who's done it, and nobody has. And you're like, well, darn it. Now we have to. And it's not easy. Sometimes it's easier than we think, because I am like worst case scenario person. I'm like, you want me to do what? And I don't know that I can. I'll try, but I can't guarantee anything.
What's involved in trying a new model? Why do you say, oh no?
If you're like in some of our models, the exposure route, I mean, that is a whole nother thing. So whether it's an ingested chemical or an inhaled chemical, and or just a systemic exposure. Inhalation models are so complex because not everybody breathes at the same rate, depth, and you add like pulmonary injury to it all, and like the effects of a chemical to their respiratory rate. I mean, everything changes. And so having a reproducible model is very challenging.
Okay. So even if you start out with one big puff of badness, it would land on us all differently, especially if we were injured. And so then you're trying to measure what's in our system producing a result.
Right.
So yeah, lots of ways things can get messed up.
Oh yes.
Right. Yeah.
Every possible.
Yeah. And do you use like a multidisciplinary approach to that? Or is it just kind of like hunkering down and figuring out what works?
We definitely use a multidisciplinary approach. We bring in experts from all different areas. And fortunately, over the last many, many years, I won't say how many, of working with different researchers, it's such a collaborative work environment that you can phone a friend. Be like, I'm trying to do this. It's not working. And everybody's always more than willing to help. And it's not only academic partners, but partners at CROs that we've worked with. And we all just, it's almost like a happy family. And we all help one another.
I want to pick up on something you said, that you've worked with multiple companies who might have the device that would deliver the antidote or whatever. Could you talk about what it's like working with companies versus, just do your experiments with the team?
Right. So I think the difference in working with companies is I think we all have similar goals, but ultimately they want a product to go to market, because otherwise they don't have a company. And so they're very motivated, which works well with our group because we're fast-paced. We like results. We like to move quickly. With them, you just have to make sure to be honest and tell them, like, these are the studies we do. This is what we can offer. If you're looking for something that doesn't fit into our research arena, as much as I would love to work with you, I can't offer that to you right now, but I can help you find somebody who will, because at our institution, we have 1 million different researchers who work in different areas. So I think being realistic with the goals of what they're wanting to achieve, what you want to achieve, and how that can work together, and then just being honest. And if you can't do it, you can't do it.
And how would you characterize your favorite collaborations with companies? What are some of the features that are like this, when it works beautifully, it's like this?
The thinkers. I love the thinkers, because sometimes our industry partners, they're more focused on the business aspect, but they always have the thinkers, because without the thinkers, they don't have it. So when you get to really develop that relationship with the people who are behind the scenes and identify our similar goals and aspirations and come up with an experimental plan, or even like we've written proposals with some of our industry partners. And there's one in particular that we sat at a round table, and there was a pre-proposal that was due in 2 days. And we're like, this is the great opportunity for us to write something together. We have
48 hours.
Yes, we have 2 days. How can we do this? And we sat at a table, and in 2 hours we had it figured out. And after a lot of work and a great technical writer who helped us out, we wrote this great pre-application and got invited for a full proposal. So I love those moments.
Nice. We are so grateful do you have any parting advice for anybody who, you know, might be interested in a research career in the clinical space or in the military medical space?
I think be flexible and be brave. And don't be afraid to ask the dumb questions, because if you have the question, somebody else probably does too. And so ask.
Any parting wisdom for you?
I don't think.
I mean, you have plenty of people who approach you saying, "Oh, I might." You know,
I've got
I'm
plenty of
interested.
people.
What should they do to be successful getting help from you?
I think it's a common theme that we've heard today. Be prepared to ask for help. Understand the questions you're asking, I think, to an extent, right? So we get a lot of folks who will come to me and I don't know enough about this, and I'll say, Tara, is this something you want to do? Is this something you can do? And quite often, and with some of our other collaborators, we'll get folks approaching us and I don't know what their question is. They can't articulate to me what they need from us. And so being able to ask the questions that you might think are dumb, but asking questions to establish what each other's expectations are. Because if you can't articulate what you want, I'm never going to give your work to Tara to evaluate. I'm never going to ask her to call you. And so being prepared to articulate what you want, what you need, and why you're coming here, that's what's going to open the door. I don't think I'm a gatekeeper, but sometimes I don't want to burden our already very, very busy investigators. And so being able to articulate to me what I need to tell Tara.
I think that's very important, because how many times, I mean, you have people come to you with maybe an idea,
or just like, I like research. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's your goal? What are we trying to accomplish here? And I think that's an important. Why are we doing this?
Right.
Yes.
They have to do to put a little skin in the game by at least preparing, reading, maybe even writing a one-pager. Years ago, a mentee told me what he did, and I adopted it, and everybody who was in our room at the time subsequently adopted it, because we would have many students who come to University of Colorado, whether they're medical school or whatever, and they say, "Oh, you know, I want research to be part of my career," and I, you know, you ask them some questions and say, go back, go away, go home, and write me one page, describe what in particular you would like to study. And I am not joking you. I would say 99% of the people never return. Never return. One page. And it frankly doesn't matter what they write. Like literally write anything. But they won't take the effort to participate in this conversation. And then they were just like talking.
It's probably the right fit for them to not end up going into that field, because it is difficult sometimes. You'll develop this huge idea of your research study, but then you forget to ask why. Why do we care? And it's important to take that effort and to really think critically about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.